This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Alright, kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast about great trash and difficult art, and I'm going to call this like a proposed lockdown entertainment recommendation episode, because the show that I'm going to talk about today has, is it 7 seasons? Spread across Netflix, and I think the last season is still on TVNZ on demand if you happen to be in New Zealand. And it gives me very great pleasure to welcome my guest for this evening, Fraser Greig, who is in fact my boss. Hello, Fraser. How's it going?
Hello, employee. Although a very peculiar employee in these very strange times.
Yes, indeed. So I guess before we get into the meat of the show, I mean the obligatory question is, how is lockdown going?
It's a lot different to last time. Not to make this about work too much, but last time work sort of dominated what we were doing because we are an access media outlet. We provide information where we can. This time, people's desire for information not so obvious, and so we haven't done as much. So I'm not twiddling my thumbs, but what I can do is somewhat limited because I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's been a lot less definite in terms of how long we're going to be locked down. And also I think people are much more used to the idea. So there's a lot less kind of general panic and freak out because it's less new.
Yeah. I don't know if a peek behind the curtain is warranted, but we're recording this on the Friday before the briefing that will tell us what's going to happen over the weekend and next week. The experts, everyone's got a different idea of what's going to happen, and even the non-experts have even more opinions about what may or may not happen. So yeah, we just got to wait and see.
That's the one, and I mean, whatever happens, it is likely that we'll stay at some level of lockdown, which means that people will have plenty of time to watch TV, which is my attempt at a seg into talking about the thing that I wanted to talk to you about in particular, which is the TV series The 100.
It's like we're foreshadowing a post-apocalyptic dystopian future. Where's my rocket?
I mean, you know, people are thinking about taking to space as a way to avoid the worst of what's going on. So maybe the series
I wouldn't call Richard Branson and Elon Musk people for a start.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos even less so, I suppose. So I guess the reason that I'm interested in talking about The 100 is that it's a TV show that I think I'd be quite happy recommending to people, in the sense that I don't think that anyone who I would be happy to talk to under normal circumstances and have a reasonably friendly relationship with is not going to, no one's going to be horribly offended by anything that happens. I think there is a political undertone to the show which is questionable, and we can maybe get into that later. But, you know, you're not going to be... It's not outrageously offensive. You're not supporting any truly awful people by indulging in this piece of media, but it is kind of trashy in a number of ways, which I think are kind of fascinating.
It's really good family fodder, I think, because it has at very simple levels social commentary stuff. Like if you were teaching kids about Media Studies 101, the 100 is really good where it starts talking about human nature, when it starts talking about politics, when it starts talking about religion. And I was thinking about this before we started. One of the things that really appealed to me was its complete ambivalence to sexuality, which I think is really neat. Now, I say that from a position of a rather simplistically informed rainbow community ally. Much like the Big Bang Theory, I actually think that paints the, in air quotes, nerd and geek community in a fun and approachable light. But I know people in that community that absolutely detest that program. So similarly, some people in the rainbow community may not like how sexuality is portrayed in the 100, but in terms of that simplistic approach and an introduction to a number of concepts, you know, the main character is bisexual. There's a very healthy gay male relationship. There are lesbian relationships, and absolutely zero effort is made to sort of glorify or explain those. They just happen, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, there is one specific thing which happens, which is there is a recurring trope known as the dead lesbian for obvious reasons, which is, like, for some reason which is not entirely clear to me, TV and film, even if it's reasonably progressive and reasonably tolerant of homosexual relationships generally, if there's like a main character female pairing, then one of them will die horribly almost as soon as it becomes official. You can look at like Buffy for that. I think they gave their main lesbian couple like a while, but then one of them gets murdered.
Willow and I can't remember her name.
Yeah, I know it's a very long time ago, and I never watched a lot of Buffy, so my Buffy knowledge is not hugely detailed to start with. But certainly that is a thing that happens. Clark and I've completely forgotten the
Alexa.
Yeah, that's right. The previously enemy commander Alexa get together, and then Alexa almost immediately dies, which, you know, it would be nice if they'd managed to skip that particular landmine. But aside from that, I would agree that it deals with it just as a kind of matter of fact. You know, these people are in relationships, and these other people are in relationships, and we're not particularly worried about who's in a relationship with who because it's the future, and that's no longer important.
I like sort of delving into the sort of unofficial history of all this, and I can assume that when all the space stations came together, there was, you know, gay relationships would not be discouraged given that population control was a huge issue. So, you know, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, so just on the off chance that we have people who've tuned in to listen to an episode specifically about the show, The 100, and don't have the faintest idea what we're talking about, the mention of space stations is probably a good point to just briefly seg to a very basic, like, here's what the deal is kind of discussion. So the basic setup is that it's the future. Earth has been ravaged by nuclear war, and as far as we know, the majority of humanity are stuck in orbit on a space station waiting for Earth to become habitable again.
And I have to say, I watched The 100 on your original recommendation many years ago, and the way you described it was what you've done up to that point, and then said, and in order to see if the Earth is inhabitable, 100 conventionally attractive teenagers are dropped onto the surface of the planet. And I went, okay. And as soon as you watch it, you go, yes, it's that kind of TV. Got you.
Yeah, no, it is very much, I believe it's attached to the American cable channel, the CW, which is the kind of, like, slightly too well-lit, conventionally attractive people playing 10 years younger than their actual age in romantic dramedy type channel. And it's very much that kind of thing in tone. You know, you see a lot of people becoming suspiciously attractively mucky or suspiciously clean, living in like primitive conditions in the woods for the first season.
So yes, they get dropped on Earth. It turns out people are still living there, and drama unfolds. And the very quickly you learn that this is going to be about trying to settle somewhere, war, move, try and settle somewhere, war, move, repeat ad nauseum for 6 or 7 series, basically.
Well, and this is the bit where the I guess the political outlook of the show comes in, and that's a thing that I find quite interesting, because I have 2 points of view on it. I think it does one thing quite well and another thing less well. And the thing I think it does quite well is that every time they introduce a faction, you could argue that by the time you're getting to the dynastic possession cult people who like pass their consciousness down over generations, which is series 5 or series 6, it's quite late in the show, and things are getting a bit off the rails by that point. Like yes. it sort of falls to bits a bit there, but particularly for the early seasons, every time they introduce a faction, it doesn't take long before you get where that faction is coming from. And if you accept where that faction is coming from, then the stuff that they're doing, you might not be on board with it, but you can at least accept that it makes sense. And I think that's a really smart piece of characterization about like how come well-meaning people get into conflict with each other.
Yeah, I mean the factions as well. I think it was my daughter pointed out. They're like I think she said they're like the bloody houses of Hogwarts School. The Ice Nation are Slytherin. The main first group you meet are the Gryffindor, because you get to know them the most, and so they're slightly more their motivations are slightly more complex. There's the ones that just live out in the woods and try and be peaceful. They're the Hufflepuffs. It's again, Media 101. Yes, that's because this is how Hollywood and storytelling works. You know, there's only like 7 stories in the world, and you just sort of plaster. Star Wars, great example of standard fairy tale storytelling as well. So I go back to my original point. When people are making these observations, the 100 is a really easy way, a really good platform to base those conversations on.
I mean, you mentioned the idea that it's kind of simplistic in the way that it characterizes these factions, and I would agree with that. And I think, as it gets further on, more and more of the factions become straightforwardly villainous, and that it becomes a problem even when you can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, by the time you get to that sort of series 5, 6, and even the last season, which that let it down, and that's, I believe, because victims of their own success, they ran out of material from the books. I haven't read the books. Cass Morgan wrote 3, I think. But I've read the extended Wikipedia synopsis of them, and the series bears no real similarity to the books at all. The premise is there, but half the characters are either not mentioned from the books or they're new in the series. It doesn't go anywhere near as far down the story trail as this one does, as the TV series does.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's TV that was always made very much in that classic American mold, where the idea is that you try and spin over to another season, you try and spin over to another season, and you try and spin over to another season. And I think it if you're talking about media literacy, it's a good example of how you could land that particular trick better than Lost.
Yes, or Heroes.
Or Heroes, or any of these other things that, were quite compelling for the first, maybe the second season, and then just kind of disappeared up their own fundamental orifices as they, became more and more convoluted. I do think I have thoughts about the ending, but it's definitely an ending and it's not.
Yes. And the ending doesn't sit well with me either, but it does follow a story. It does have an arc. It does come to a conclusion, and it bears a second viewing. I watched it the whole gamut of the seasons with my wife the first time round. We binge watched when United Video, the last remaining DVD store in Palmy, was still open. We were, when it came out on box set before it came out on Netflix, we binge watched an entire season in a weekend, which is a ludicrous way to spend a weekend, but nonetheless we did. And so we then decided that it would be a good idea to watch it with the kids. The kids would probably quite enjoy it, so we've started with them. And there's a lot of effort that has gone into the continuity side of things, the storytelling side of things. It's quite a feat to watch the ending and then within a couple of months go back to episode 1 and go, wow, I remember them talking about this scene at the very end, and they nailed it. I enjoy that. I enjoy continuity. I enjoy attention to detail that they've done very well, and it's bred a spin-off prequel because there are things that I don't really understand about the 100 that is perhaps fairer to talk about if people haven't watched it than the ending. The grounders, the people that survived on the ground, have this really neat Creoleized language, which is based on English, but it's the Creole and everything. It's very clever. It's very well done. But the leaders, the way it's portrayed is that the leaders can still speak traditional English because, of course, Hollywood, America, it's English and not any other language. So the Creoleized language is for the sort of the proles, the lower people, and English is for the leaders. But very shortly after, you realize everyone can speak English. Everyone speaks English just fine. So why the Creole language? But as it turns out, that's explained in the course of the seasons. And this prequel they're talking about, which I think is about the war leading up to the decimation of England, well, one can hope, of the world, talks about that language and who invented it and how it promulgated. So I'm quite looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, so this is a series which finished in 2020, and I don't especially believe in spoilers, so I'm okay talking about the ending. And I think the reason that I think it's because the ending does a very strange thing, but I think
that's putting it mildly.
I think the reason that it gets itself to that position is through this other bit of the politics of the show, which I think that the show handles less well than the way that it kind of tries to humanize the factions, which is that it's got a view of human nature where it is pretty much always impossible for any two groups to share resources. And I think that's a very, how would you put it? It's like, it's quite a colonial point of view. Like it's a point of view which says all of these awful things that we've done in our history collectively are justifiable because it's human nature that no two groups of people can coexist without one of them attempting to stomp on the other one. And it just happens that we were better than that, and that's not a thing we should feel guilty about. Humph. And by the way, white people discovered New Zealand in the first place, and the treaty wasn't signed with the Vikings, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth.
It does do that, but I think it does it intentionally, and I'm okay with that. It because the characters are always saying we must do better, we mustn't do the same thing over and over again, and they end up doing the same thing over and over again. But also they illustrate that an alternative way of thinking is impossible because the alternative way of thinking was personified by a character called Jasper. who was dope smoking, harmless, comedic guy in the first couple of seasons. He faces tragedy upon tragedy. All the people that he holds dear end up dying, and he breaks. But he was the personification of the, peace man, just everyone get along. And he goes and, he commits suicide in the end. And I think that is, again, a media literacy thing, a personification, an illustration of that way of thinking just being impossible in this storyline. And I think the writers were aware of that. So they're not glorifying it, I don't think. And I don't think they're being apologetic for it. I think it's on purpose.
Yeah. I guess where I'm coming from is I feel like, there are a faction of peaceful isolationists who are potentially kind of interesting but do almost nothing, and there are elements they enter into their own story that present alternative points of view, but I feel like making those people wrong was a choice, is I guess what I'm saying. And what that means is that by the end of the second or third season, they've engineered their main audience point of view character into committing a literal genocide. And I think where they eventually end up with the ending, which is a very, very strange piece of work, is that they spend the rest of the show attempting to grapple with the fact that they did a genocide, and they made their sympathetic point of view character the person who did it, and trying to find a way to reconcile with that, or not justify it, but make it feel like it's been handled in some way.
I'm a little more ignorant of the nuance than you are, so I'm happy to accept that I'm wrong in my analysis. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that they painted the likes of Jasper as wrong. They used him as an illustration to say that this group of flawed individuals that can't help but do a genocide. It's a difficult one, because I can completely understand where you're coming from, particularly when you get to the final season and, arguably the most enlightened human beings and indeed living things in the universe are training to fight a war. You're not going to get out of that way of thinking if this is the universe in which things have been painted. I'd like to be a little bit more generous with the writers of it, and prescribe upon the writers a little bit more intellect or intent, and go with all the people that didn't want to follow this narrative that died off did so as an illustration that it just wasn't going to work. Not that they were wrong, not that there was any apology for it. It's just the way things were in this particular film universe.
Yeah, sure. And I guess all I'm saying is that the way things are in any film universe is a choice that the writers have made. They can make a number of choices, and they chose that particular one.
I should really read the books and see if it's the universe that Cass Morgan portrayed, or if that was a bit more, if this has all just been fodder for TV.
Well, certainly I feel like, because as you say, I haven't read the books either. I've read the long Wikipedia article, but as far as I can tell from that, a huge portion of the world building is unique to the TV show. I think another point of view, or another person worth talking about, because we mentioned Clark a bit, and I think Clark's interesting in terms of talking about the show, because she's introduced as this very wholesome, resourceful character, then about halfway through the entire run of the show, she is the one that the show picks on to do a genocide. And in the final season or two, she gets relegated to this very strange screaming mum role, which is, I feel like they done her dirty. I was not happy with that. I think another character who's quite an interesting lens to look at this show through is, her name's gone out of my head, Olivia. Octavia, that's right. Because Octavia similarly goes through an arc where she ends up killing a truly phenomenal number of people, but because it's not quite genocide, she's kind of let off the hook at the literal final judgment, which is where the show decides that it's going to end things. And I think that's an interesting distinction that they draw.
Yeah, it is. We're in our second viewing, we are at the point where you say you're okay with spoilers. So the prisoners have arrived. That particular storyline's unfolding, and we're learning about the Dark Year.
Right.
Which is when Octavia went particularly off the rails to the point where you truly think she's not going to come back from this. We know later on she does, and she becomes a wholesome character again. Insofar as how wholesome can Octavia actually get. But she's really dark at the moment, to the point where there was an opportunity to not go to war, because there was food available where there had not been before. So she burns all the food so that they have to go to war. She is gone uber dark. Yes, I think her story is probably the one of most development. I think it's fair to say all the characters are unrecognizable from the beginning of the season to the end. Arguably Clark the least unrecognizable. But Octavia probably amongst the most.
Yeah, no, she definitely goes through some stuff, and I think we can talk about that in a second, but it's going to be time for us to take a brief break so that I can set up a child who's sitting on the dinner table next to me on her Zoom call that's happening at 11:30, and we'll be back right after this, so if you will just bear with me one moment.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
Child had failed to turn the audio on, so she could not hear her Zoom meeting. All right, we're back. This is Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash and complicated relationships with art and culture. This time we're around, this is a long things to watch during lockdown edition, and I'm talking to Fraser Greig about The 100. So right before we went into the break, we were talking, I was starting to talk about the character of Olivia, because I think...
Octavia.
I did it again. Octavia, not Olivia. Who's interesting in terms, I think, of the kind of capacity for character writing that the show has, because she starts as this sort of spoiled, petulant teenager, evolves into literally the best at murder, becomes murder queen of a bunker, and then kind of evolves back into a person in time to be kind of judged less harshly than many other people by the end of the show.
I agree almost with your summary of her character, but not to do her a disservice, I would say she wasn't so much a spoilt and petulant teenager. Her origins are she was an illegitimate child. You know, the population control on the space stations was such that you could only have one child. She was the second child of a woman, and she lived under the floor. So she was a very socially untuned individual. Yes, there was a bit of petulance, I grant you that, but I'd say she was very timid at the same time. So that character growth to the murdering bunker queen is quite impressive. What I will say is that in the first season, I wasn't convinced they'd cast her right for that role. To go from timid, living under the floor to, warrior queen was a bit of a stretch, I thought. But given her small frame, everyone towers over her. She pulls it off. She totally pulls it off. It was very, very well done.
Yeah, I think, you kind of have to swallow a fundamental implausibility about all of the grounders, which is what they call the people who are left behind on Earth when the people who we start off thinking is the last humans jetted off to space to hide from nuclear annihilation. They all wear this sort of I don't know, you'd call it like Mad Max core, scrounged armor, scrounged junk aesthetic, weapons and armor. But despite the fact that it's all, at least in theory, made of junk, it's all incredibly well preserved and effective junk. And the weapons that they build out of scrap metal are really tidy and hold an edge really well, and there doesn't seem to be any downside to everything being made of garbage, which you have to kind of just swallow that. But once you do swallow that, the thing that I didn't expect a show of this kind to do quite so well is all of the fight choreography that it does, because battle becomes a thing that happens with increasing regularity, and they always look quite visceral and well staged. And as you say, Olivia is not a Octavia is not the actress is not a large woman. She is significantly smaller than even most of the main cast before you start adding in hulking Mad Max warriors, and yet she manages to come off as a credible fighter, and in a way that kind of makes her small frame plausible.
The 100 came, I think, at a point where the distinction between, I guess, TV budgets and film budgets became less and less, but there's still evidence of it. And I think part of the suspending disbelief is, of course, this is a work of fiction. It's post-apocalyptic dystopian nonsense, but it's fun. But if this were a film adaptation, I think you'd find that the outfits would be a bit more visceral and thrown together. I think this is just a symptom of the TV budget. Which you I think partly due to the Marvel TV arm of their thing has really bridged that gap and brought TV budgets and film budgets closer together, because ironically the TV budget, which I can't think you can even call it that now, this serialized small screen stuff, is long form film now, just carved up into bite-sized pieces. The 100 you can binge watch and it flows really well. Netflix has that handy feature where you can skip the intro, so you don't have to get the recap, and you can get a really neat flow. And it is a serialized or cut up into bite-sized chunks. Each season is a movie.
Yeah. I was just trying to look up in another window while I was talking to you the name of the woman who plays the sort of general of Tree Crew, who are the main kind
Indra.
of... Yes, that's right. Who are the main kind of grounder faction that they meet, at least at the start of the show.
Indra's a really complicated character. I quite like her, although... I'm one of these grumpy old sods that if I disagree with you, it also means I don't like you most of the time. So when I disagree with Indra, I go, I don't like this character. But she's this weird hybrid of the only answer is to kick your butt, but I also have sage words of advice often. And it's hard to balance that when her only answer to conflict is I'm going to wipe you out.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think Indra is probably a favourite character of mine because once you accept the frame of the show, which is that conflict is inevitable, there's this very practical approach that she has where she does say, if I disagree with you, I'm going to wipe you out. But the show's kind of said, you're going to be in that position over and over and over again. And she always has a very straightforward and practical way of approaching those kinds of situations. And she becomes this really kind of, I don't know, for want of a better term, supportive presence for other characters. Because
and she develops as well, because when her daughter comes onto the scene as the only remaining flame keeper, which, read up on it if you don't know, that's probably too much to get into. She does soften quite a bit at that point when she's been reconciled with her daughter, because to tie the two characters together, Indra takes Octavia under her wing to build her into the warrior queen that she'd become. And there was that mother-daughter relationship that she'd obviously missed out on. And then that's further embedded, I think, when her true daughter turns up out of nowhere to try and save the day by killing people as well.
That's the one. Actually, I'd argue a thing that the show kind of has a penchant for is these incredibly dangerous motherly characters, because that's certainly the way that Indra comes to be, and you're just at the point where they introduce the prison ship, so that's a bunch of people who are dangerous criminals who've been shipped into space as punishment and have now come back, and they're led by someone who kind of turns into that trope again.
Yeah, personified perhaps by the final installment of Harry Potter with the immortal line, "Not my daughter, you bitch." This is the mother scorned, or the mother caught in a corner. You see it with Clark's mum, Abby. You see it with Clark when she adopts a child. As you say, she descends into the screaming mother role at the end, which is a little unfair. Motherhood is and actually the first commander, whose name has escaped me entirely. Ali. Well, Ali was the program she created, but anyway, she was like the original mother figure to the new grounder race that comes through. So it's obviously a theme that someone wanted to convey. Whether it adds anything to the storyline or not, I don't know, but it's certainly there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a thing that
men overall are portrayed as pretty useless in the whole thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the most subtle theme in the whole thing is a sort of feminism 101 trope, where men are just these useless people that run around and do the heavy lifting. It's the women that actually, in this case, get us into the trouble all the time.
Well, into and out of, it's the sort of cause of and solution to all life's problems kind of formulation.
Which makes this a very reserved recommendation.
While we're talking about characters, I think it's interesting that of all of the people to hang on to through to the very end, as well as Octavia, they managed to preserve Murphy, because this is the guy he's sort of the archetype of the unlikable, out for himself, anything
weasel.
to survive weasel character.
Cockroach. In fact, they call him the cockroach oftentimes because he always survives, but no one likes him.
But they managed to kind of develop him to a point where, I don't know, at least you probably don't want to see him get murdered.
No, I quite like him. I would argue he's possibly one of my favourite characters because I guess not so much that we all know someone like him, but I think he's the one that you can understand his motivations the easiest. Every decision he makes, it's pretty clear why he's doing it. He's never at the forefront of sort of saving the human race. He's always in the background saving the human race. And there's a couple of instances where he's vital to whatever particular solution they're coming up with at the time. No, I think he's possibly one of my favorites, more so than Bellamy. Bellamy, I found irritating to begin with, suitable support in the middle of the series run, and again irritating at the end when he, no offense to anyone who's listening, finds religion in this new form that they've got, and it just all falls apart for me at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my reservations about the show come down to that kind of final season with Bellamy's turn to religion. They do put him through an arc where you can see why he would come to the conclusions that he comes to. Like they sort of do the enlightenment by torture kind of thing.
Yeah, I understand the storyline. I didn't buy it for 1 second, not with the preceding 6 seasons worth of utter hell that they've been through. It didn't stack up for me that he would so easily go, oh, this is, it's like saying he got Stockholm syndrome. He's been in that position a fair few times and not. Yeah, they were looking for a way to close out the season. I don't think they needed to kill off Bellamy, but maybe he thought that maybe the actor thought they were doing another 4 seasons and wanted no bar of it, so wanted killed off at the end. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel about Bellamy's religious turn kind of the way I feel about Clark's surrogate motherhood thing. I feel like it's like eventually they wanted an engine to push the plot in particular directions, and they used the character to do that, but in a way which is kind of counter to previous characterization. Clark had not previously been myself over the group character particularly, but once they give her this surrogate daughter, suddenly it's, even when the surrogate daughter's not actually into that, it's, I must do everything I possibly can to protect her, and damn the consequences.
Yeah, and actually they do her a disservice as well, because literally every decision she makes as soon as she has a daughter is wrong, which does a huge disservice to the idea of motherhood in its entirety, really, if you start looking for themes and understanding what the writers are trying to convey. I would argue that's more clear and harmful than perhaps our earlier observation around the likes of Jasper and humans' nature to just go to war all the time.
Yeah, no, it seems to be their view that when women have babies, the brain is transferred from the mother to the child, and if you adopt a baby instead of actually, giving birth to one, it happens sort of magically instead. It's a very weird characterization for Clark, and as I said at the start, I feel like they've done her dirty there.
Yes.
I feel like they've done Bellamy dirty as well, but he's been insufferable at other points in time, so it feels more forgivable. The main selling point of Bellamy to me is that his actor is called Bob Morley, which always makes me think of like a legally distinct off-brand Bob Marley, which is just a fun thought to have when you're looking at the credits of a TV show.
Yeah, no, the Bob Marley one always caught me as well. And the trivia thing, Clark and Bellamy, the actors that play them, are married in real life, apparently.
Oh, right. I didn't realise that. Wow. There you go.
Which must make my wife's contribution to the observations of the 100, and this is a tad unfair because she does enjoy it, and we have watched it twice, and we enjoy the storyline, but her main observation at the moment is that the woman that plays Clark cannot keep her mouth shut. Every scene, her mouth is just sort of half open if she's not talking. It's just the jaw doesn't, the teeth don't connect. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it.
Yes, yeah, it's a difficulty. So I guess we're getting towards eventual time. I'm looking at my recording clock, and I'm aware that it's inaccurate because I've been interrupted a couple of times. But C'est la vie, as the French say. But, I mean, summing up, I think, as we've said, this is a show which starts with a great deal of promise. It's always...
It has speed bumps.
It has speed bumps. It's always slightly frustrating to me when an American show says, look, the whole world, and what they mean is America, because, you know, the whole world has been devastated by a nuclear war, but all you ever experience from it, and coincidentally where everyone important either comes from or lands their spaceship, is the same bit of America that you can get to in a couple of days' walk, because they never go on journeys that last more than a few days. So it's all confined to about the size of a reasonable city.
And coincidentally, when the Earth blows up again, the only survivable patch of land is in that area as well. I mean, America is so lucky.
Yeah, it's a very... I mean, I know exactly why they did it, and it's probably not even America. It's probably Vancouver, where the tax breaks are nice for shooting TV shows. But, you know, it's clear for practical reasons why they did it, but it's a strange choice.
I mean, there are, I guess, if you're into continuity, there are some neat aspects of it, and some of the set design is awesome. There are things that are just going to get your goat about this. Why does everyone speak American English on the space station when the space station was made up of 9 stations from around the world? Yes, there's a racial mix, but they all speak American English. Why? The confinement to America is an issue. Simple things like eating and everything. There's a lot of unanswered questions that you just have to gloss over. And you'll be fine.
There's an element in the first season where it looks like mutant animals are going to be a real problem.
That's the other thing that was really neat.
Then they completely disappear.
Yeah, the deer turns round and it's got like 3 eyes in its mouth, and you're going, of course, radiation. That makes perfect sense. I'm looking forward to how this unfolds. Octavia's boyfriend, whose name is Lincoln, he rides a horse that its face is disfigured and everything else. You're going, this is attention to detail. And then season 2, and obviously the CGI guys just couldn't be arsed, and everything is normal again. Apart from that one excellent scene where they stumble into what was evidently a zoo before the apocalypse, and they get chased by a ruddy, great big gorilla. I think that was well done. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's great. On another, it's another one of those odd stretches of plausibility, because they're asking you to accept that this mutant gorilla has been there for like 100 years. Since I forget what the time gap is supposed to be between the rocket launch and the landing.
This is the other thing that I have chosen to gloss over, because if memory serves, it's 90 years after the bombs.
Yeah, that sounds right.
90 years for what transpires, a woman from the space station to come down to Earth, find the survivors, protect them with the clever blood thing that she'd developed, and then have society descend into this primitive thing where it's all swords and leather and Mad Max and everything. What? No, it wouldn't go that way. This was a highly intelligent scientist woman, the first commander. She didn't, get murdered straight away. She obviously ruled everyone for a while. Her brain is then implanted into her memories implanted into the next commander and the next one, so that when you are the commander, you have all the knowledge of all the previous ones. At what point did everyone suddenly decide that we were going to go all Lost Boys or Lord of the Flies? So I choose to ignore that, apart from when it's brought to my attention again.
Yes, yeah, no, you just kind of have to roll with the fact that they decided that the human factions were more interesting than the spooky animals, and then they decided that what they wanted was Mad Max. So what you're getting is Mad Max, and don't think too hard about the Mad Max.
It's Mad Max and Lord of the Flies smooshed together, really. More I think about it, the more that makes sense. And actually, a lot of the narrative is shared between Lord of the Flies and the 100. If you think of it from a purely story point of view, you can see where Kaz Morgan perhaps got her initial inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like repeated trolley problems. The show, it's endless. Like this group of people will die, or this group of people will die, and you must decide which.
Flip a coin.
But for all of that, as we said, I don't think you're going to support anyone awful if you choose to indulge. As you said, you watched seasons at a time in a weekend, so it is eminently consumable. It is not going to annoy you in that way.
And what I would thoroughly recommend it for is, as I've said, the sort of media literacy aspect, because you can discuss fairly obvious themes with your kids and have it make sense. But also, it is perfect for if you're all sitting down as a family, and our kids range from 10 to 16. There's 4 of them, fairly even spread, 10 to 16. Finding something that everyone is going to enjoy that is appropriate for everyone is really tough. And what the 100 does really well is keep the language fairly, well, I think it's 100% clean, actually. There's the odd sweary word, but nothing serious. But what we call the smoochy scenes, of which there are many, because we're dealing with teenagers in the first half with this newfound liberation, it cuts off just at the right point. So someone might take a top off, but you see their back. You don't see their front if they're a lady. Smoochies, they might lie down on a bed and then cut, it's gone. No one has to avert their eyes, but it's clear what's happening, which is important for the story. My 10-year-old can watch it and he may have questions, but nothing indecent is seen, yet the story can be told in a fairly mature way. And I think that is rare, to find something that the whole family can enjoy. And because there's 6 or 7 seasons of it, you're going to get good bang for your buck when you decide. We've been watching it weekends for months, and there's months to go. It's good long form way to sit down with the family and enjoy something.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for joining me on this episode. There are 2 things I like to do by way of wrapping one of these up. The first is to say, to ask if you have any related recommendations. I'm not sure that I do, to be honest, just because I haven't watched a huge number of other series from the CW. So while I recognize some elements of visual style from like memes and screenshots and things of other shows, I don't know how many shows hit that precise pitch in quite the way that this one does.
In terms of featuring a conventionally attractive human being in a post-apocalyptic dystopian future, Mother, or I Am Mother.
Righto, yep.
It's on Netflix. It's a movie about a child raised by a robot on her own, not sure what's going on. We enjoyed that one. Little bit more challenging and maybe not quite as suitable for the 10 to 12-year-olds, but well worth a watch.
Excellent. Good to get some sort of a pitch, and that's the thing that I'd been thinking about watching. So I will have a look at it, and maybe I'll talk to someone about it at some point. And finally,
you will have issues with that as well.
Finally, are there things, Fraser, that you would like to plug? I know that you host a show yourself here on Manawatu People's Radio, so people can find that, which is fairly unrelated to what we've just been doing, but does exist and people can listen to.
I don't think there'll be a lot of audience crossover with my... I have an unhealthy interest in post-apocalyptic dystopian future media and also local government.
Basically the same thing.
Basically the same. Yes, the catch-up is on NPR. I produce that almost daily. Schedules often clash and that sort of thing. Trying to keep that going to the best of my ability during these lockdown times, because that's a good place to get information about how the lockdown is affecting people at a local level as opposed to national level. So if people want to dip into that, they'd be I'd be happy for them to do that. And I am semi-retired as a musician, but my most previous outfit was Heavy Blarney, which is an Irish rock band. There's some stuff on SoundCloud and Spotify and Bandcamp. If people want to look for Heavy Blarney, that's the sort of music I'm into, and hopefully you'll like it too.
Magic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.